In 1902, a mule named Old Pete was lowered into the Consolidation Coal Company mine in Fairmont, West Virginia. He was 4 years old. He would spend the next 18 years in total darkness, a mile underground, hauling 200-pound coal cars through tunnels so low he couldn't raise his head. When they finally brought Old Pete to the surface in 1920, he was blind. Not from disease, but because his eyes had forgotten what light was. There were 30,000 mules like him working underground in American coal mines. Most never came back up. I've been through the Fairmont mine logs, the stable ledgers, the payroll sheets from Consolidation, and from a dozen small operators in Marion and Harrison counties. I've read the handwriting of bookkeepers who counted mules like ton cars of coal, and I've read the handwriting of boys who couldn't spell their own last names, but could turn a string of 4 mules in a tunnel 6 feet wide by lamplight. What keeps coming back to me is the silence of it. A mile of rock over your head, no weather, no sun, no sound, but the drip of water and the clank of a trace chain. If you care about the work that built this country, the animals and the children and the grown men who did it, please subscribe to Global Old History right now. This channel exists for the forgotten names, the forgotten beasts, the forgotten shifts that ended in a rockfall nobody wrote down. Stay with me, because Old Pete's story is only where this begins. Old Pete was a dark bay, 16 hands, bought as a 3-year-old out of a Missouri mule barn by a Consolidation buyer named R.L. Ewing in the spring of 1901. Ewing paid $165 for him, which was good money for a mule. The paperwork says Pete was gentle, which meant he didn't kick the handler, and he loaded into the cage without rolling his eyes white. A mule that loaded quiet was worth twice a mule that fought, because a mule that fought on the cage could kill a man on the way down. They walked Pete into the cage one April morning in 1902, blindfolded him, strapped his front legs, closed the gate, and dropped him 900 feet in under a minute. His driver that first year was a boy named Clarence Hostetler. Clarence was 12. Born in 1889 in a hollow outside Farmington, West Virginia, the third of 7 children of a Pennsylvania German miner named Jacob Hostetler. Jacob had lost 2 fingers on his left hand to a fall of slate in 1897. By 1901, Jacob was coughing up black at night and couldn't carry a full shift, so Clarence went down in his place. The company paid Clarence 65 cents a day. Clarence's job was to take Old Pete from the stable at the bottom of the shaft, hitch him to a string of 4 empty pit cars, walk him down the main haulage 2.5 miles to the working face, wait while the loaders filled the cars with 3,200 pounds of coal, and bring the string back out. He did this 8 times a shift, 10-hour shifts, 6 days a week. His lamp was a tin teapot shape with a wick soaked in lard oil pinned to the front of his cap. Before I tell you what happened to Clarence and Pete in the winter of 1907, I need you to understand what an underground coal mine in Appalachia actually was in those years. Because what we call a mine today is a machine. And what a mine was then was a hole dug by 2 men with picks, one shooting coal down with black powder, the other loading it into a wooden car that a mule dragged out by lamplight. A coal seam in West Virginia might be 4 feet thick, sometimes 3, sometimes less. The miners worked on their sides or on their knees, swinging a short-handled pick called a bug, undercutting the coal for 10 or 12 feet, then drilling a hole with a hand auger, tamping a cartridge of black powder, running a squib fuse, and shooting the face down. The coal fell in chunks the size of a man's chest. 2 loaders scooped it into the car. The car sat on wooden rails an inch wide, and the mule stood in the dark 30 feet back, ears flat against his neck because the ceiling was so low. The main haulage, where Pete worked, was higher, maybe 6 feet. Maybe 7, where they had robbed the roof for room. But the crosscuts to the working rooms, the spurs, the places where a mule had to turn a loaded car in a space the size of a small bathroom, those were the places mules lost their ears. Literally, lost them. A full-grown mule walking a low drift will scrape his ears raw on the rock in a week. Within a month, the hair is gone. Within a year, the ears are calloused leather. Old Pete's ears by 1907 were cracked along the tips and healed over in knots. The stableman, a black freedman from Virginia named Elias Bowers, rubbed them with lard every Sunday. Elias Bowers was 54 in 1907. He had come to Fairmont in 1888 looking for steady wages, and he had gone underground and stayed. The company paid him $1.10 a day to feed and tend the string of 14 mules that lived in the stable at the bottom of shaft number 3. That stable was cut directly out of the rock, whitewashed with wooden stalls, a trough, a hay chute from the surface, and a single ventilation shaft that drew stale air out with a mechanical fan. The mules lived there, they ate there, they slept there, they did not come up. A mule that went underground as a young animal in 1902 might not see daylight again until 1920. Some never did. Operators argued, with a straight face, that bringing a mule to the surface was cruel. The animal's eyes couldn't take the sun. The temperature shock in summer would kill him. The simpler truth was that hoisting a 1,200-pound mule up the shaft and back down again cost money, and mules were cheaper to replace than to preserve. I want to stop here and tell you something that I think most Americans have forgotten, and I mean forgotten in the full sense of the word. Forgotten because we chose to. The American coal mines of the late 19th and early 20th centuries were full of children, not a handful, not a few here and there, tens of thousands. Boys of 8, 9, 10 working the breakers on the surface, picking slate out of coal with fingers that bled open every day. Boys of 11, 12, 13 driving mules underground. Boys of 14 and 15 working as trappers, sitting alone in the dark beside a wooden ventilation door for 10 hours, opening it when a mule train came through, closing it when it passed. A trapper boy's lamp would often burn out halfway through the shift. He was told not to light it again until he heard the next train coming, to save oil. So he sat in the absolute dark of a mile of rock, listening, for 5 hours at a stretch. I've read the testimony from the 1910 Pennsylvania child labor investigation. One boy, asked what he did to pass the time, said, "I pray a little and I cry a little, but mostly I just sit." He was 10. Please, if this is the history you came looking for, hit that subscribe button. The channel runs on subscribers. Nothing else. One click tells the algorithm that these stories matter, and I'll keep finding them. I've got 60 more years of coal country to walk through with you. Let me tell you now about the scale, because scale is what makes you understand what a single boy with a single mule actually was. Between 1870 and 1920, Appalachia produced more coal than any region on Earth: Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, Southern Ohio, Tennessee, so Virginia. By 1917, American mines were cutting 650 million tons a year. That coal moved the railroads. It fired the steel mills of Pittsburgh and Gary. It heated the tenements of New York and Chicago. It ran the merchant fleet across the Atlantic. Every ton of it was cut by hand, and every ton of it, from the working face to the surface tipple, was moved by a mule. Electric motors came late. The first electric mine locomotives were installed in a handful of Pennsylvania anthracite mines in the 1890s, but the smaller bituminous operators in West Virginia and Kentucky kept using mules into the 1940s. The last working mine mule in America, a Jenny named Little Jeannie, retired from a mine in Bonanza, Arkansas in 1962. I've seen her picture. She looked like somebody's grandmother. At peak, over 30,000 mules worked underground in American coal mines. In Pennsylvania alone, there were more than 15,000 in 1910. A mid-sized West Virginia operation like Consolidation's Fairmont Field might keep 200 underground mules across its shafts. Bigger companies kept more. Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron ran over 3,000 pit mules across its anthracite workings. A mule cost the company between $150 and $250 to buy. He ate about 14 pounds of hay and 6 pounds of oats a day. He drank 12 gallons of water. He lived, if he lived, 15 to 20 years underground. He worked 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. He pulled between 8 and 12 loaded cars of coal per trip, depending on the grade. On a flat haul, he could move 2 tons per trip. On a grade, with a trip brake, he could hold 3 tons downhill without running. And here is the thing nobody writes down. Mach, the mule, knew the mine. Better than the boy did, better than the foreman did. A veteran pit mule learned the haulage the way a sailor learns a harbor. He knew the grade. He knew the low spots where a man had to duck. He knew which turnouts had gas in them and wouldn't enter them. He knew the sound of rock working above a room and would stop in the track and refuse to go forward 10 minutes before a fall came down. Miners talked about this. Every old coal country diary I've read mentions it. A mule stops, the driver curses him. The driver tries to pull him, the mule won't move, 5 minutes pass, 10, and then the roof comes down in the next room, and the mule walks on. There is a documented case from the Monongah No. 8 mine, 1906. A black mule named Jim refused to enter a crosscut where 7 men were loading cars, refused twice. The driver gave up and let him out to the main. 40 minutes later, a methane pocket ignited in the next panel, and the blast would have killed every man in that crosscut. The 7 men walked out because Jim wouldn't walk in. The company gave Jim an extra ration of oats for a week. A year later, December 6, 1907, the Monongah No. 6 and No. 8 mines exploded together. 362 men died. It is still the worst coal mine disaster in American history. Jim was in the stable at No. 8 that morning. He died with the men, 362 men and boys, the official count. Historians now believe the real number was closer to 500 because the company payrolls didn't list the sons who went down with their fathers to help. 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, unpaid, uncounted. When rescue crews reached the stable at No. 8, they found the mules still in their stalls, killed by the after damp. Elias Bowers, the stableman I told you about at Fairmont, lost his brother that day. His brother was the assistant stableman at No. 8. The brother's name was Moses Bowers. He was 49. Please, if you're still with me, subscribe. This is how these stories stay alive. 1 click, then come back, because I promised to finish Clarence and Old Pete, and I'm going to. In January of 1907, a full 11 months before Monongah, Clarence Hostetler was 17. He had been driving mules for 5 years. He had grown 6 inches. He was no longer a small boy, and the foreman, a Welshman named David Llewellyn, had marked him for promotion to loader as soon as the spring rotation came through. Clarence had a girl in Farmington named Mary Agnes Fleming. He was saving to buy her a silver ring. On the morning of January 29, 1907, Clarence took Old Pete down at 6 a.m. as usual. They pulled 4 empties down the main to the Section 4 face. The loaders filled them. Clarence hitched Pete, spoke to him, and started back out. Halfway up the main, a sprag, which is a wooden pin used as an emergency brake, broke loose from the second car. The full string, 12,800 pounds of coal and wood, began to run backwards down the 4% grade. Pete felt it in the traces. He braced. He tried to hold it. A grown pit mule can hold 3 tons on a grade if his shoes are sharp and his legs are strong. But 4 full cars on a wet grade in January with a broken sprag is not 3 tons. It's 6, and the mule cannot hold 6. Clarence could have let go of the bridle. He could have jumped for the manway, which is the walking space cut along the side of the haulage. Every driver was told, in his first week, that if a string broke loose, you let the mule go and you save yourself. A mule is $200. A boy is free. Clarence did not let go. He stayed with Pete. I don't know if he tried to unhitch the traces or if he just didn't want to leave him. The witnesses, 2 loaders who'd come up behind him, said Clarence was pulling at the lead chain when the string ran over them both. They pulled Clarence out the next morning. He was still breathing when they got him to the surface. He lived 4 more days in the company hospital in Fairmont. He died on February 2nd, 1907. He was 17 years old. The company paid his mother, Effie Hostetler, $75 and his last week's wages. Mary Agnes Fleming kept the silver ring Clarence had already bought her, uncompleted, no inscription, for the rest of her life. She died in Clarksburg in 1973 at the age of 84. The ring went to her niece. Old Pete survived the runaway. Pete was built low, and when the string caught up with him, the couplings buckled and threw the car sideways into the rib. Pete broke his left shoulder and tore his right ear nearly off. They brought him back to the stable. Elias Bowers sat up 3 nights with him. The veterinarian from Fairmont, a Dr. Harrison, came down the cage and splinted the shoulder with scrap lumber. By April, Pete was walking. By June, he was pulling light loads. He worked another 13 years. He was the oldest mule on the Fairmont roster by 1919. Elias Bowers retired in 1918. The new stableman, a white boy from Mannington named Jesse Krause, age 19, kept up the tradition of lard on the ears every Sunday. In March of 1920, Consolidation closed the number. On 3 shaft for rehabilitation, they had to bring the stable up. They took the mules out over 3 days in the cage, 4 at a time. Pete went up on the 2nd day. The stablemen blindfolded him, as they had in 1902, to keep him calm in the cage. When they got him to the surface, they led him to a small fenced pasture the company kept near the tipple, and they took the blindfold off. He stood still for a long time. Jesse Krause, the stableman, was standing beside him. Krause wrote in a letter to his sister that Pete's eyes, which had been dark and normal in lamplight, looked milky in the sun. He couldn't see shapes. He could see light and shadow. He walked forward in the pasture and stopped where he heard the fence because he couldn't see the fence. He put his nose on the top rail and stood there. Pete lived 8 more months in that pasture. They turned him out with 2 other retired mules, a sorrel named Dan and a jack named Whiskey. He never got his sight back fully. He ate grass, which was new to him. He let children from the patch town come up to the fence and pet him. He died on a November morning of what the company vet wrote down as old age. Jesse Krause buried him at the edge of the pasture. There is no stone. The pasture is pine woods now. I have walked it. The ground is soft there, and the wind comes across a ridge from the west. That was 1 mule. 30,000. The boys are harder to count because the companies didn't always write them down. The 1900 U.S. Census listed 25,000 boys under 16 working in American coal mines. The 1910 census listed 24,000. The Pennsylvania Department of Mines reported in 1902 that 16,000 boys under 14 worked as breaker boys in the anthracite fields alone. Those are just the ones with papers. The sons who went down with their fathers to help load, who drew no pay and weren't on any roll, are beyond counting. Let me give you a few of the names. A driver named Stefan Kozlowski, age 13, killed in a roof fall at the Lackawanna No. 2 mine, Scranton, Pennsylvania, March 1903. A trapper named Willie Jenkins, age 11, died of what the coroner called exhaustion after working a double shift at the Pocahontas No. 4 mine, McDowell County, West Virginia, August 1908. A breaker boy named Giuseppe DeMarco, age 10, his hand taken off by the slate picker belt at the Plymouth Breaker, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, 1909. He survived. His mother, a widow, she got $40 from the company and was told to keep quiet or her other sons wouldn't get hired. I've read their death certificates. I've read the company ledgers where their wages stopped being entered. Nobody stopped to bring them up in the history books. Nobody put up a marker. In most cases, the company didn't even pay for the coffin. The family did. What did it build? That's the question I keep coming back to. Because the animals and the boys paid for it with the only thing they had, and I think we owe them the courtesy of knowing what we got for it. We got the 20th century. That's the blunt answer. The steel that built the skyscrapers of Manhattan came out of furnaces fed by Appalachian coal. The locomotives that crossed the continent burned coal that a boy with a mule had brought up from a seam 3 feet thick. The battleships of the Great White Fleet, the heating plants of every hospital and school in the country, the cook stoves of 10 million farmhouses, the engines of American industry between 1870 and 1920, every one of them ran on coal that a mule dragged out of a mine in the dark. Between 1880 and 1920, the United States mined roughly 11 billion tons of coal. At 2 tons per mule trip, 8 trips a shift, 300 shifts a year, across 30,000 underground mules, and 50 years of work, the pit mules of America hauled something close to 2.5 billion tons of coal out of the working face to the main haulage. Not all the coal. The mainline locomotives eventually took over for the long hauls. But the first mile, from the face to the bottom of the shaft, the mile that no machine could do, that was the mules. And the boys. The boys who drove them. Sure, the boys who sat in the dark beside the ventilation doors. The breaker boys whose hands were bent at 12 from picking slate 8 hours a day. Those boys grew up, the ones who lived, and they became the miners of the 1920s and 1930s. They got silicosis. They got black lung. They died at 50, 55, 60. Their wives buried them in the company cemeteries. Their children went into the mines. Quick ask, and I mean it. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe. The algorithm buries old industry stories unless enough of you tell it we care. Click the button. I read every comment. I want to finish with day-to-day life. Because the big numbers are one thing, but what it actually was, morning to night, is what I want you to hold on to. Up at 4 in the dark. The miner's wife had been up since 3:30, building the fire, making coffee, packing the bucket. The bucket was a 2-tier tin, a lower compartment for water, an upper for food. Bread, cold bacon, an apple in season, a hard-boiled egg on Sundays. The miner took his bucket, kissed his wife, walked out into the frozen mud of the patch town, and joined the other men walking to the tipple. The boys walked with them. Clarence walked with his father, Jacob, until Jacob couldn't anymore. Then Clarence walked alone. The cage went down at 5:30. 10 men to a cage. It dropped 900 feet in 40 seconds. Men crossed themselves. Some prayed, some didn't. At the bottom, the bosses handed out the day's work. Which section, which face, which mule. Out to the face by lamp. The miners cut coal, the loaders loaded. The driver and his mule made their trips. Noon was a 10-minute stop where you sat on a lump of coal and ate your bucket with hands black with dust. No talking. Not because it was bad luck, because you were too tired to talk. Quitting time was when the shift whistle sounded on the surface, which the men underground couldn't hear, so the foreman walked the haulage and shouted it. The cage took them up, 10 at a time. The sun, if there was still any, blinded them. They walked home covered in coal. The patch houses had no bathtubs. Most miners washed in a galvanized tub in the kitchen, water heated on the stove. The black came off their skin. It didn't come out of their lungs. Saturday was payday, often in script that could only be spent at the company store. Sunday was church for some, rest for most. Monday, it started again. This was the life, for 50 years. For 5 generations in some families, a boy followed his father down, a mule followed a boy into the dark, and when the boy grew up and died of black lung at 55, his son walked the same path to the same tipple. I drive through coal country sometimes, West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, Western Pennsylvania. You can still find the portals if you know where to look. A cut in the hillside, a pile of red dog, which is the burned slate from the old waste dumps, still there after 100 years. A company church with the denomination painted faintly on the clapboard. A cemetery where the stones say miner or driver under the name. Sometimes just our boy. Our boy. That's the phrase that keeps finding me. Our boy Stefan, 1890 to 1903. Our boy Willie, 1897 to 1908. Our boy Clarence, 1889 to 1907. The mothers chose those stones. They paid for them in installments. They walked up to them on Sunday afternoons for the rest of their lives. And the mules. The mules are nowhere. No stones, no markers. A few pasture corners in old mine country where the stablemen buried the ones who made it out. Old Pete under the pines near Fairmont. Jim, the mule that saved the 7 men at Monongah, killed a year later in the same mine he warned about. Little Jeannie, retired 1962, lived out her last years in a farm pasture in Arkansas and died in 1968. Nobody wrote down the numbers on the rest. 30,000 mules underground. Most went in and did not come out. 30,000 mules, tens of thousands of boys. 11 billion tons of coal. 50 years. That was American coal mining with mules, 1870 to 1920. That was the work and the animals and the children that built the country you live in. I'm glad you stayed with me. Tell me in the comments if one of your own people, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, a great-uncle, worked the coal. I read every comment. I'll see you in the next one.